History is not a river. It is a fragile thread, stretched taut over a chasm of infinite possibilities. Most of the time, it holds, but sometimes, a single event, a single moment, threatens to sever it, sending reality careening into an unknown future.
In 48 BC, that moment arrived in the harbor of Alexandria. The flames of Julius Caesar's civil war, a conflict for the soul of Rome, leaped from his burning fleet. They were hungry, indiscriminate, and they turned their gaze toward a single, monumental building on the shore. The Great Library of Alexandria. This was not merely a collection of books. It was the accumulated consciousness of the ancient world, 500,000 scrolls containing the genius of Mesopotamia, the wisdom of Egypt, the philosophy of Greece, the mathematics of the entire human story up to that point. It was a singular nexus of knowledge, a living brain for our young species. And in our timeline, it burned. Not all at once, but this fire was the beginning of a long, slow death, a hemorrhage of knowledge that arguably plunged the world into 1,000 years of darkness. 1,000 years to rediscover what we already knew. But what if the thread held? What if a single gust of wind, a random fluke of meteorology, had blown the other way? What if the brain of the world wasn't damaged? What if, instead, it was supercharged? This isn't a story about a disaster averted. It's a story about what happens when humanity's progress is never reset. A story of a different kind of evolution. This is the story of the Alexandrian singularity, the timeline where humanity did not just walk, but sprinted toward the stars, achieving a form of technological godhood before the Renaissance had even begun. The survival of the library in 48 BC was not a quiet victory. It was a thunderclap. The near catastrophe served as a profound wake-up call for the Roman world. Caesar, and later Augustus, saw the immense repository not as a mere trophy of a conquered kingdom, but as the single most valuable strategic asset in their new empire. The mission changed. It was no longer enough to simply times store times knowledge. The new imperial mandate was to understand, replicate, and disseminate times it. The greatest minds were summoned not just to read, but to create the world's first true engine of discovery. They invented the encyclopedia, a systematic summary of all known fields. They invented peer review, as Alexandrian scholars rigorously tested and debated the theories of Archimedes and Euclid. They translated everything from Babylonian astronomical charts to Indian medical texts into Latin and Greek, creating a universal language for science. And then, they found the toys of the geniuses. Heron of Alexandria's steam engine, a mere curiosity in our world, was seen differently through this new lens. With access to advanced metallurgy from Hittite scrolls and precision engineering from Greek mathematical texts, Roman artisans didn't just replicate it, they perfected it. What was a parlor trick became a workhorse. The first information age had ignited the first industrial revolution. By 200 AD, the city of Alexandria was choked not with the smoke of war, but with the steam of progress. The change rippled outward, carried on Roman roads and Roman ships. The empire, which in our timeline was beginning to groan under its own immense weight, was given a new skeleton of brass and steam. Mines in Britannia, once reliant on the back-breaking labor of slaves, now echoed with the hiss of steam-driven pumps and drills, pulling forth tin and silver at an unprecedented rate. Vast agricultural projects in Egypt used steam to power irrigation systems, creating surpluses that could feed a continent. But the greatest innovation was not on land, but at sea. The Ethelship, a trireme powered by a compact, efficient steam engine, made the Mediterranean a Roman lake in a way Caesar could only have dreamed of. Unbound by the wind, these ships could patrol, trade, and reinforce the empire's vast borders with terrifying speed. Yet steam was only the muscle. The brain of this new world was taking shape in Rome itself. Inspired by the rediscovered Antikythera mechanism, fully deciphered thanks to the library's combined knowledge, a generation of philosopher-engineers built the world's first mechanical computer, the Antonine Analytical Engine. This machina logica was a wonder of the world. It couldn't think, but it could calculate at a speed that was simply supernatural. It optimized tax collection, predicted famines by analyzing harvest data, and designed impossibly complex aqueducts and roadways. It made the sprawling, chaotic Roman Empire logical, manageable. There was no Western Roman collapse. Instead,
The empire entered the Pax Romana Machina, a golden age of stability and prosperity, built on a foundation of information and power.
Even the great spiritual shift of this era, the rise of Christianity, unfolded differently. In a world where the mechanisms of the universe were being laid bare, faith was not a retreat from reason, but an extension of it. The new religion integrated the scientific worldview, seeing the discovery of natural laws as an act of piety, a way of understanding the divine mind of God. The Church became a patron of science, arguing that to study the creation was to glorify the Creator. By 800 AD, while our world was mired in the Dark Ages, this timeline was ascendant. Its territory was secure, its population was educated, and its greatest minds, having mastered their own world, began to look towards the only unconquered territory left, the heavens. The Age of Aether had begun. Astronomy, once the domain of priests and astrologers, became the most prestigious and well-funded science in the empire. The principles of optics, laid down by Euclid centuries earlier but now perfected, allowed for the grinding of immense lenses with unparalleled precision. From observatories in the Alps and the deserts of Syria, Roman astronomers mapped the face of the moon. They saw the rings of Saturn, and, in a discovery that shattered the foundations of their cosmology, they saw moons orbiting Jupiter. The Earth was not the center of all things. The revelation wasn't met with heresy and persecution, but with awe and exhilaration. It was a divine puzzle, waiting to be solved. This celestial ambition drove a revolution in another, more esoteric field. The vast collection of alchemical texts in the library, once filled with mysticism, was now subjected to rigorous, systematic experimentation. The quest for gold was abandoned for the quest for knowledge. They isolated elements, discovered acids and bases, and unlocked the secrets of chemical reactions. And in doing so, they found fire. Not the simple fire of wood or coal, but a new, concentrated chemical fire. A propellant. It was first developed for mining and engineering, a way to clear tunnels through mountains for their ever-expanding roads. But the astronomers, the sky-gazers, saw another purpose. They saw a way to build a ladder to the heavens. They called them Icarus probes, a humbling reminder of the dangers of flying too close to the sun. The first launches were small, barely reaching the upper atmosphere, but they learned with every attempt. They developed multi-stage propulsion, gyroscopic stabilizers based on spinning tops, and telemetry systems that relayed data back to Earth using coded flashes of light. By 1300 AD, Roman rockets were touching the void of space. The empire had outgrown its cradle. The final frontier was no longer the forests of Germania or the deserts of Parthia. It was the silent, star-dusted sea of the cosmos. What followed was the most ambitious undertaking in human history, the Leadership Program. Its goal, declared by the emperor in a speech to the Senate, was singular and divine: to land a man on the moon and return him safely to the Earth. The astronauts were called Olympians, individuals selected for their physical perfection, their intellectual brilliance, and their philosophical fortitude. Their ships, the Aether ships, were the culmination of 15 centuries of unbroken progress. Powered by advanced chemical engines, guided by miniature, clockwork analytical engines, and built from alloys perfected over generations. They were not crude machines, but masterpieces of engineering, each named after a hero from the epic poems. The year is 1492 in the old calendar. In our timeline, a Genoese navigator was pleading with Spanish monarchs for 3 small ships to sail the Atlantic. In this timeline, the entire Roman world held its breath, its eyes fixed on a pillar of fire ascending into the heavens. The journey through the void was a pilgrimage. The 3 Olympians aboard watched the earth shrink, a sight no human had ever seen. The overview effect, the profound cognitive shift that comes from seeing our world from a distance, struck these men of a classical age. They saw not a map of imperial provinces, but a single, fragile, living world. The descent was perfect, guided by the flawless ticking of the navigation engine. Then, contact. A gentle shudder. And silence. The Aquila was on the moon. The commander, Gaius Valerius Magnus, stepped onto the surface. His voice, transmitted across 250,000 miles of empty space, crackled through every speaker in the empire, from the Forum in Rome to the great library itself. He spoke in the language of Cicero and Virgil, the words that had built his world. Unus gradus parvis pro homine, he began, his voice filled with a profound, soul-shaking reverence. Esid saltus magnus pro humanitate.
One small step for a man, but a giant leap for humanity. The Alexandrian singularity was complete. Knowledge, carefully preserved, nurtured, and compounded for a millennium and a half, had allowed humanity to climb out of its cradle and walk among the heavens. The gods of Olympus were not beings to be worshipped, but a destiny to be achieved. They had become masters of their world, and now they were poised to become masters of their solar system. We look back on this lost timeline not with envy, but with a deep and haunting sense of loss.
The fire in Alexandria's harbor wasn't just the destruction of papyrus and ink,
It was the incineration of a future. A future where we might have reached the stars while the great cathedrals of our own timeline were still being built. It leaves us with a terrifying question. We believe we live in an age of unprecedented knowledge and progress, but we are the descendants of a civilization that suffered a catastrophic data loss. We spent 1,000 years relearning what we already knew. What if the timeline we inhabit, the one we think is so advanced, is in fact a dark age, a shadow of what could have been? And what other libraries, what other irreplaceable stores of knowledge and potential are we allowing to burn today through our own neglect, our own divisions, our own short-sightedness? The thread of history is fragile, and the flames are always hungry.
What pivotal moments in history do you believe could have sent us down a completely different path? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you wish to continue exploring the echoes of what was and the frontiers of what could be, subscribe to ChronoShift, turn on notifications, and never stop asking, what if?